The night she arrived, the wind had a voice that night. Not the kind that howled. That would have been too easy to ignore. No, this wind whispered, a constant hiss that slipped through the seams of Jacob Miles' old cabin, sliding over the hearth's warmth and curling cold fingers around his ankles. The kind of whisper that made a man feel watched. Jacob sat at his table, hunched over a battered mug of coffee gone lukewarm, watching the fire chew through the last of the chopped pine stacked by the wall. The blizzard outside was growing teeth. On this side of the continent, storms could last 3, sometimes 4 days, the kind of storms that buried livestock, swallowed whole sheds, and made the unprepared disappear. He had enough food for 2 weeks, enough water for longer, and enough ammunition to make anyone think twice about knocking. Which is why the knock startled him. It wasn't loud. 3 soft thuds, barely audible over the storm's hiss. Jacob froze, coffee halfway to his lips. Nobody came out here. Not in this weather, and especially not to his cabin. His closest neighbor was 30 kilometers west, and even they wouldn't risk a night trek through sub-zero winds and predator country. The knock came again, this time weaker. He pushed back his chair slowly, the wooden legs groaning against the floor. The blizzard's light, a pale blue glow reflected from the snow, leaked through the frosted windows. The door was thick, reinforced from his soldiering days with internal steel braces, but he still reached for the rifle propped against the wall before moving closer. "Who is it?" he called, voice low but carrying. A pause. Then, through the wind, a fragile voice, cracking like brittle glass. "I can cook. Bear your children, please. Don't throw me out." Jacob blinked, unsure he'd heard right. The voice was feminine, soft, alien, and trembling. Words that didn't belong on the doorstep of a human ex-soldier's remote home. He unlatched the first bolt, kept the rifle tight in his grip, and opened the door only a crack. The wind clawed its way in instantly, bringing with it a flurry of snow, and the figure standing in it. She was small, thin, shaking violently, wrapped in what might have once been a fine cloak but was now ragged and rimed with frost. Her skin wasn't human, faintly luminescent, a pale silver blue that caught the moonlight. Strands of white hair clung to her face, plastered there by ice. Her lips were almost colorless. She was barefoot. Jacob didn't need to see her eyes to know she was minutes from collapse. He'd seen enough cold casualties to recognize the signs. Sluggish blinking, slow speech, a sway in her stance. She was dying. "Inside," he said, not unkindly. She didn't argue. She stumbled forward into the cabin as he shut the door fast, locking the storm out. The instant the heat from the hearth touched her, she shivered harder, a dangerous sign. Jacob set the rifle down and guided her to the chair nearest the fire. "What's your name?" he asked, moving quickly to fetch blankets. Her lips moved, but the words didn't come. She looked at him with wide, luminous eyes, fear and exhaustion mingling there. He swore under his breath, grabbed 2 wool blankets from the cot, and wrapped her tight, tucking them around her small frame. Her fingers, when they brushed his, were like ice. He put a kettle on, poured a cup of hot broth from the pot he'd been nursing earlier. "Drink." Slowly. She took the mug with both hands, or tried to. Her trembling made it slosh dangerously, so Jacob steadied it until she got a sip down. Some color returned to her lips. She let out a small sound, relief or pain, he couldn't tell. "You're lucky I heard you," Jacob said, watching her closely. "If I hadn't," she interrupted in a whisper. "I didn't think you'd open the door." "You knock in the middle of a blizzard. You're gonna get an answer," Jacob said, though in truth, most people out here wouldn't have opened it. Not for her. Now that she was close to the firelight, he could see her better. Slender build, delicate facial structure, faint markings on her cheeks that looked like natural patterns in the skin rather than tattoos. And those eyes, not human at all, the pupils slit like a cat's, surrounded by an iridescent ring of shifting colors. She was from the southern colonies. He'd seen her kind during the war, not as soldiers, but as the ones in the background, attendants, servants, property. That last thought sat heavy in his gut. "You said you can cook and bear children," he said slowly, repeating her strange offer. Why? She looked down, shame flickering over her face. Because that is what I am worth. Jacob leaned back slightly. You're worth more than that. She gave him a puzzled look, like she didn't understand the sentence. You're safe here, he said, though part of him still kept his guard up. I'm not taking you in for services. I'm just keeping you from freezing to death. Her expression softened, but there was still a guarded wariness in her eyes. If you turn me out, they will find me. They? He asked. She hesitated. Her grip tightened on the mug. Bad people. I can tell you. But later. Jacob nodded once. He didn't press. He knew the look of someone too close to the edge to be interrogated. For now, warmth and food were more important. He added more wood to the fire, the flames flaring bright, throwing long shadows across the cabin's walls. Outside, the storm's voice rose again, but it felt farther away now. You sleep here tonight, he said, gesturing to the cot. We'll talk in the morning. She hesitated again, as if waiting for him to name a price. When he didn't, she nodded slowly, clutching the blankets tighter. Jacob sat back at his table, sipping the last of his cold coffee, watching the small figure in the firelight. She was a mystery, in trouble, if her words about being hunted were true. But he'd already made his choice when he opened that door. Outside, the wind whispered. Inside, the cabin was quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and the faint sound of her breathing growing steadier. The night had brought him a stranger. The morning would bring answers. A stranger in my home. When Jacob woke, the storm was still gnawing at the world. The light that filtered through the frosted window was a weak, pale smear, the kind that made you wonder if the sun had decided not to bother. The air inside the cabin was warmer than last night, but still crisp enough to make him pull on his old service sweater before leaving the cot. The sound of movement stopped him. She was awake. The alien woman sat cross-legged on the rug near the fire, still wrapped in blankets, her silver-blue skin reflecting the glow. She had stripped away the wet, ragged cloak, now hanging near the hearth to dry. Her hair, white with faint hints of lilac, was brushed back from her face, though she still looked wary. When she noticed him, her posture stiffened. Did not throw me out, she said softly, as if confirming it wasn't a dream. Jacob rubbed the sleep from his eyes. Told you last night. I don't make a habit of throwing freezing people into blizzards. She tilted her head slightly. Humans are not always so kind. We are told you are dangerous. Jacob gave a dry chuckle. Dangerous, yeah. Kind, sometimes. Depends who you ask. He crossed the room, setting water to boil for coffee, and started slicing bread for breakfast. She watched his movements intently, as if studying him for signs of intent. You got a name? He asked over his shoulder. She hesitated. Sarah. Sarah, he repeated, the name rolling awkwardly but pleasantly off his tongue. All right. I'm Jacob. Jacob, she echoed, as though testing the shape of it in her mouth. Her voice was quiet but precise. He pushed a plate toward her. Bread, a small slice of salted meat, and a tin cup of warm water. Eat. Slowly. Your body's still catching up. She obeyed without argument, though she examined the food before each bite, sniffing it delicately. The way she handled the bread, with both hands, almost reverently, told him she hadn't eaten in a while. You're from the southern colonies? Jacob asked, watching her from across the table. Sarah nodded slightly. My people do not travel here. Too cold. Too far. Then what were you doing out there? Storm like this will kill a native in under an hour without shelter. She kept her gaze on the bread. I was running. From who? He pressed. Her eyes flicked up to his, bright and unnerving in their color. Bad people. Jacob leaned back in his chair. That's twice you've said that. I'm going to need more than a vague warning if I'm going to decide whether you're a danger to me. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked down again, shoulders curling inward. He recognized the body language. He'd seen it in civilians during the war. People so used to being owned that speaking too freely felt like stepping into a trap. He decided not to push. Not yet. Instead, he shifted topics. You said you could cook. That true? Or was that just something you thought I wanted to hear? She glanced toward the small cooking area by the wall, then back at him. I can cook, well, but your foods are different. You learn quick. Jacob asked. Sarah's mouth tugged into the barest hint of a smile. Yes. Jacob stewed, gesturing for her to follow him to the counter. All right, then, consider this your first lesson in Terran cooking. For the next hour, he showed her how to slice root vegetables, boil them without losing all the flavor, and use salt sparingly in stews. She watched like every movement mattered, asking careful questions about ratios and timing. By the end, she had made a small pot of vegetable broth on her own, seasoning it with a pouch of alien herbs she produced from the folds of her blanket. When Jacob tasted it, he was surprised. That's actually good. Sarah's expression brightened, though she quickly hid it behind a neutral mask. Food is important. It keeps people together. Jacob nodded. That's true. The warmth of the fire and the smell of the cooking almost made him forget that an alien stranger had wandered into his home less than 12 hours ago. Almost. It was then he noticed her wrists. When she reached across the table to pass him a bowl, the blanket slipped, revealing pale skin marred by raw, circular welts. Not fresh enough to bleed, but deep enough to be recent. They were the marks of cuffs, the kind designed for long-term restraint. Jacob's jaw tightened. Those from your bad people? She froze, her hand lingering in mid-E before she pulled the blanket back around herself. Yes. He didn't press further, but something in him shifted. Those weren't the marks of casual roughness. They were the sign of ownership. He'd seen them on prisoners during the war. The difference was, back then, he had a rifle and a squad to do something about it. You're safe here, he said finally, meaning it more than he had the night before. Sarah gave a small nod, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes, as if safety was a concept she didn't quite believe in. The day passed in relative quiet. The blizzard kept them trapped, the outside world nothing but an endless expanse of swirling white. Jacob tended the fire, mended a torn boot, and checked his stored supplies. Sarah spent most of her time wrapped in blankets near the hearth, occasionally asking questions about the tools and weapons hanging on the walls. Late in the afternoon, Jacob stepped outside to bring in more firewood. The wind had eased slightly, but visibility was still poor. He had just set the new logs down by the door when something caught his eye at the tree line. A figure, standing perfectly still among the snow-laden branches. Too far to make out details, but tall and watching. Jacob kept his face neutral, pretending he hadn't noticed. He stepped back inside, locking the door behind him. What is it? Sarah asked, sensing the change in his posture. Nothing you need to worry about, Jacob said, but his mind was already racing. Out here, strangers didn't just wander by, and if they did, they didn't stand in the cold without a reason. He set the rifle by the door again. Whoever was watching, they weren't just curious. They were here for something, and he had a damn good guess what. Or rather, it was the secret she carries. Jacob didn't sleep well that night. Every time the wind rattled the shutters, his eyes snapped open, searching the dark for movement. The figure at the tree line hadn't returned. At least, not where he could see. But his gut told him that was worse than if they had stayed in plain view. When dawn came, it was muted and gray. The blizzard had finally broken, leaving behind a stillness that felt unnatural, like the land was holding its breath. Jacob checked the perimeter with deliberate slowness, boot prints crunching in the fresh snow. His own tracks from yesterday were already gone, but a faint line of deeper impressions led from the forest toward the cabin's southern side before vanishing. Whoever had been out, they knew how to cover their trail. Back inside, Sarah was already awake, seated by the fire with her hands wrapped around a mug of steaming broth. She looked calmer, almost like she belonged there. Jacob didn't want to ruin that, but avoiding the subject wasn't an option anymore. You ever see a tall man in dark armor before? He asked, shrugging off his coat. Sarah's hands tightened slightly around the mug. You saw him? Yeah, Jacob said. Didn't wave back. She set the mug down carefully. He is not a man. His kind, they serve the house lords. Jacob narrowed his eyes. And one of those lords is after you. She nodded, gaze fixed on the flames. House Varesh. The name stirred something unpleasant in Jacob's memory, a half-forgotten debriefing from his army days. Varesh wasn't a small-time slaver. He was a planetary power broker in the southern colonies. The kind who could make people vanish in broad daylight and have it written off as an accounting error. You gonna tell me why? Jacob asked. Her voice dropped. My family owed him. When they could not pay, he claimed me instead. As property, as breeding stock. She spat the last words like they tasted wrong. I cooked for his household, served his table. He said one day I would bear him heirs, to bind my bloodline to his. Jacob's grip tightened on the edge of the table. And you ran. I ran, she said simply. I waited until the winter festival, when most were drunk. I stole a trader's sled, crossed into human territory. She gave a small, humorless smile. I did not realize how cold your lands are. Jacob exhaled slowly, processing. And now Varesh's people are here. They will not stop, Sarah said. To him, I am not a person who escaped. I am stolen property, and you will be punished for keeping me. Jacob's instincts told him she was right. Frontier law was loose out here, and if Varesh had leverage with the colony governor, legal arguments wouldn't count for much. Tell me about those marks on your wrists, Jacob said, not unkindly. Sarah looked down at her hands. Cuffs. I wore them every day except when I was in the kitchen. To remind me, I belonged to him. Jacob didn't speak right away. Instead, he reached for the kettle, poured 2 mugs of coffee, and slid one toward her. You don't belong to anyone now. Her eyes lifted to meet his. You believe that, but you're kind, you are strange. How so? Jacob asked. You fight for things you do not own. You protect people who are not yours. It is dangerous and admirable. Jacob smirked faintly. That's humanity for you. We don't like being told who gets to live free. The rest of the morning passed in a rhythm that almost felt normal. Jacob repaired a broken hinge on the pantry door while Sarah experimented in the kitchen, adding unfamiliar herbs to his usual meals. The smell was richer, warmer, the kind of scent that made a place feel like a home rather than a bunker. But just when the quiet started to feel safe, a sharp thunk against the cabin's outer wall made Jacob freeze. He grabbed the rifle from its place near the door and peered through the slit in the shutter. No movement in the yard, but a thin wooden shaft protruded from the snow, right at the base of the wall. An arrow, its head wrapped in black cloth. Jacob retrieved it carefully, unwrapping the cloth to find words burned into the fabric in angular alien script. He didn't need to translate every letter to understand the meaning. She belongs to House Varesh. Hand her over. When he brought it inside, Sarah's face went pale. It is a warning. Jacob tossed the cloth into the fire, watching it curl and blacken. Feels more like a promise. They will come soon, Sarah whispered. And not only one. Varesh will send hunters. They do not fight fair. Jacob's mind went into soldier mode. The cabin had only one real point of entry, the front door, but the walls weren't reinforced for sustained assault. The small windows were a liability, and the roof could be breached if someone climbed it. The terrain gave some advantage. Deep snow slowed movement, and he knew the land better than any outsider. But even with those edges, he was one man. You have anyone who'd come if I called? Sarah asked quietly. Jacob looked at her in surprise. Not many, but the ones who would, they'd come ready to fight. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. Then maybe I am not so dangerous to you after all. Jacob didn't answer. He busied himself securing the shutters, checking his ammunition. Every movement felt like sliding back into an old uniform he thought he'd buried years ago. The quiet life had been good, but trouble had a way of finding him. And this time, trouble had a name. When night fell, the temperature dropped hard, freezing the snow into a crust that crunched underfoot. Jacob sat by the fire, rifle across his knees. Sarah slept on the cot, breathing evenly. But even in rest, her fingers clutched the blanket as if it might be taken from her. Jacob glanced at the door. If Varesh's people came tomorrow, they'd be coming for more than just a runaway. They'd be coming to prove a point. The humans didn't get to say no. And Jacob Miles had never been good at letting anyone tell him what he could and couldn't keep. The claim. By mid-morning, The quiet had grown heavy. Jacob knew that kind of stillness, the pause before someone kicked in a door. He was by the woodpile, hatchet in hand, when the low hum of engines reached him. Not from above, no shuttles, but from the ridge to the east, where the snowpack trail wound down from the main road. The sound grew louder, sharper, until two sleek sled bikes emerged from the tree line, black and gold armor plates glinting under a pale winter sun. They stopped 20 meters from the cabin. 3 figures dismounted. 2 were armored guards, bulky and faceless behind mirrored visors. The third wore no helmet. His skin was a deep bronze hue, patterned with metallic markings that shimmered as he moved. His long coat trailed in the snow, lined in white fur that wasn't from any animal Jacob recognized. The noble's gaze swept over the cabin before fixing on Jacob. "Human," he said in a smooth, almost bored voice. "You have something that belongs to House Varesh." Jacob set the hatchet into the woodblock, slow and deliberate. "Don't think so." The noble smiled faintly, like a man amused by a child's denial. "Her name is Sarah. She is debt-claim property under the authority of Lord Varesh. She fled his household 2 weeks ago. You will release her to us." Jacob crossed his arms. "On Terran soil, there's no such thing as debt-claim property. Not for humans. Not for aliens. That's the law." One of the guards stepped forward, a heavy hand on the butt of his holstered weapon. The noble didn't stop him. "Laws," the noble said, "bend for those with the power to enforce them. Do not pretend your little frontier outpost can defy my house." Jacob took a step forward himself. "This little frontier outpost is outside your jurisdiction. She came to my door half dead from the cold. I took her in. That makes her my guest. You want her, you'll have to come through me." The guard's visor tilted, like he was calculating the distance. The noble raised a hand to halt him. "You mistake my civility for weakness, human. I could burn this cabin to the ground and salt the earth it stands on." Jacob's tone didn't change. "Try it, and I'll make sure you don't live long enough to see the smoke." Something passed between them, not just words, but the weight of 2 very different worlds meeting head-on. The noble's smile sharpened, but there was a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He'd heard the stories. Every house lord had. Humans fought wars over the smallest of freedoms, and they didn't stop until one side was ash. "You have until sunset," the noble said finally, turning away. "After that, we take her, and if you are in the way, you will be removed." The sled bikes growled to life, kicking up plumes of snow as they turned back toward the ridge. Jacob watched them disappear, then went inside. Sarah stood just inside the door, blankets clutched tight. "They came. They'll be back," Jacob said, bolting the door behind him. She swallowed hard. "You should give me to them. You don't know what they'll do to you if you refuse." Jacob grabbed his rifle from the wall. "I've got a pretty good idea." "I mean it," she said, stepping closer. "They'll kill you, and they'll enjoy it." Jacob met her gaze. "Let me tell you something about humans, Sarah. We've got a bad habit of doing the exact opposite of what bullies want us to do. Someone tells us we can't have something, freedom, land, a say in our own lives. We dig in our heels. And if they push, we push back harder. That's why we're still here in this galaxy, instead of scattered bones under someone's palace floor." She stared at him for a long moment. "You would fight for me, even though you just met me." "Not just for you," Jacob said. "For what it means if they can take you." Her eyes flickered, confusion, then something softer. She nodded once. "Then I will help you." The rest of the day was preparation. Jacob reinforced the door with an iron brace, nailed extra boards across the windows, and cleared shooting lanes through the drifts outside. Sarah moved with quiet efficiency, fetching tools, packing snow into buckets for water, and, at Jacob's request, showing him the layout of Varesh's enforcer armor from memory. "They have blind spots here and here," she said, pointing to his sketch. "The helmets have thermal vision, but heavy snow will disrupt it if you can kick it up." Jacob filed it away. "Good to know." By the time the sun began to dip, the cabin looked less like a home and more like a forward outpost, the kind he defended on too many frozen battlefields. He set a crate of ammunition near the table, filled the half high with wood, and slung the rifle over his shoulder. Once this starts, he told Sarah, you stay low. Keep to the back room. If they breach, you use the back window and run north to the ridge. I'll hold them here. Her chin lifted. I will not run. Not negotiable, Jacob said, his tone hard enough to stop further protest. She opened her mouth, then closed it, pressing her lips into a thin line. The sky was bleeding orange when the sound came again, the growl of sled bikes, but this time heavier, more numerous. Shadows moved between the trees, dark shapes resolving into armored forms as they approached. 4 riders this time, and a 5th figure on foot, the noble from before, his fair-lined coat swirling around him like a banner. They stopped just outside rifle range. The noble raised his voice, carrying over the still air. Human, the sun has set. Jacob stepped into the doorway, rifle in hand, the barrel angled low but ready. Then I guess you're here to find out how bad of a mistake you're making. The noble's smile was thin and cruel. So be it. He raised a hand, and the enforcers fanned out, moving with practiced precision through the snow. Jacob noted their spacing, their angles, the way they tried to flank the cabin without crossing into the open. Sarah, Jacob called over his shoulder, get down. The first shot cracked through the cold, echoing off the trees. It wasn't his. A slug buried itself in the doorframe inches from his head. Jacob's rifle came up like it had a mind of its own. He squeezed off a round, the recoil familiar as breathing. One of the enforcers staggered, hit in the shoulder joint, spinning into the snow. The siege had begun. Siege in the snow. The first shot was always the loudest. After that, the fight took on its own rhythm, sharp, brutal, and fast. Jacob ducked back inside, chambering another round as a spray of splinters burst from the doorframe. The nobles and forces had split into 2 flanking teams, one to each side of the cabin. That was fine. He'd been ready for that. Sarah, he shouted over the gunfire. Window, left side, kick out the snow stack. She moved fast, sweeping aside the curtain, unlatching the frame, and slamming her boot into the snow-packed shelf Jacob had built earlier. A curtain of white powder collapsed outside, blinding the visor lenses of the enforcers moving up that side. Shouts in alien tongue followed, muffled by helmets. Jacob took the opening. 2 quick shots, centemass. One target dropped in the snow, motionless. The other scrambled for cover, slipping on the frozen crust. The return fire came in a burst of crackling plasma. It scorched the wall, the heat warping wood, filling the cabin with the acrid scent of burned resin. Jacob knew the walls wouldn't hold against that for long. Back room, he ordered, and Sarah ducked out of sight. He shifted to the right-hand window, sliding the shutter open just enough to see. The second flanking team was advancing more cautiously, shields up. These weren't rookies. They were adjusting to him. Fine. He adjusted back. Jacob pulled the pin on a smoke canister, tossed it low into the snow ahead of them. The hiss was immediate, the white vapor blending with a natural mist of cold breath until it was impossible to tell where the enemy stood. He used their hesitation to change position, firing from a different angle. One shield dropped just long enough for him to hit the thigh joint. The enforcer went down with a cry. A distant voice cut through the chaos. The nobles. Take him alive if you can. The girl is unharmed. Do you hear me? Jacob grinned humorlessly. That's not gonna happen. Another shot slammed into the wall. The brace on the door rattled under impact. They were testing him, pushing toward a breach. He reached for the tripwire near the entryway and gave it a sharp tug. Outside, a buried charge detonated with a muffled whomp, sending a spray of icy shrapnel into the attackers near the door. It wouldn't kill through armor, but it would sting and stall. From the back room, Sarah's voice rang out. They are moving on the roof. Jacob cursed. He grabbed his sidearm and sprinted to the ladder leading to the loft. Sure enough, faint vibrations trembled through the wood as armored boots found purchase. He waited until they were halfway across before slamming the butt of his rifle into the beams supporting the roof's edge. The weakened timber gave way, collapsing a section under their weight. One enforcer crashed down into the snowdrift outside, the other clinging desperately to the edge until Jacob put a round through his arm guard and sent him tumbling. The fight paused, that eerie, mid-battle stillness when both sides were deciding how badly they wanted to keep going. Jacob reloaded, his breath steady, his mind already on the next move. From the tree line, the noble's voice again, louder now, edged with frustration. Enough of this. Burn it. Jacob's stomach tightened. Fire was worse than any weapon here. The dry wood would catch fast. He scanned the snow for movement, spotted two enforcers pulling canisters from their belts. Before they could prime them, a flicker of silver blue moved in the corner of his eye. Sarah. She had slipped out the back, using the snowbank as cover, and was now behind the two with the canisters. Jacob almost yelled for her to get back, but she was already acting. She kicked one enforcer's knee from behind, the joint buckling, then drove the heel of her hand into the other's helmet, knocking it sideways. The canisters fell into the snow, harmless. Jacob covered her retreat, putting a shot close enough to the downed enforcer's visor to make him stay down. She dove back through the rear window, panting, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "You said to stay inside," she said breathlessly. "And you didn't listen," Jacob replied, checking her for injuries. "But I'm glad you didn't." The enemy numbers were thinner now, maybe half still standing. But they weren't retreating. If anything, they were regrouping for a final push. "Last stand," Jacob muttered. He moved to the door, lifting the iron brace just enough to ease it open a few inches. The enemy expected him to stay in cover. Instead, he stepped into the open, rifle steady, eyes locked on the noble. The noble's expression flickered, surprise, then irritation. "Surrender her now, and I'll let you live." Jacob's voice was calm, deliberate. "You know what's funny about humans, Varesh? We don't surrender the people under our roof. Not to you. Not to anyone. And if you think killing me will make her yours, you don't understand how deep that belief goes." The noble's eyes narrowed. "Belief doesn't stop bullets." "No," Jacob said, "but it makes us stand when everyone else runs." He fired. Not at the noble, not yet, but at the snow above him, where a weighted tarp had been strung between two trees the night before. The shot severed the rope, sending the tarp and a load of packed snow crashing down onto the noble and his nearest guard. The sudden avalanche buried them waist-deep. That was enough. The remaining enforcers faltered. One dragged the noble free, and together they began to pull back toward the sled bikes. Cover fire spat in their retreat, but their shots went wide. Within minutes, the forest swallowed them again, the growl of their engines fading into the distance. Jacob lowered his rifle slowly, scanning the tree line for stragglers. Nothing. Inside, Sarah stood by the fire, still clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with something else. Or, maybe, relief. "They'll come back," she said quietly. "Probably," Jacob admitted. "But next time, I won't be the only one waiting." Calling the old guard. The snow had stopped falling by morning, leaving the world wrapped in that muffled silence only winter can bring. The kind of silence that makes a man think something's listening. Jacob sat at the table, stripping down his rifle for cleaning. Every click and scrape of metal seemed too loud in the stillness. Sarah moved quietly near the hearth, ladling out bowls of stew. She'd found ways to make their supplies stretch, dried vegetables and a little meat, slow-cooked until the flavor masked scarcity. She set a bowl in front of him. "You didn't sleep." He didn't answer right away. He had, but only in short bursts, the kind that ended with him jolting awake, sure he'd heard boots in the snow. "They'll be back," he finally said, "and they won't send a small team next time." That noble's pride took a hit. Sarah's eyes searched his face. "What will you do?" Jacob set the clean barrel down and met her gaze. "We're going to need help." He rose, crossed the room to the corner where an old crate sat under a tarp. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a battered field comm unit. The last time he'd used it was years ago, to tell his unit he wasn't coming back after the war. He'd wanted quiet, isolation. He powered it on. The screen flickered. The antenna crackled against the static-filled air. "Might be I burned my bridges," he muttered, punching in the encrypted channel sequence from memory. The signal tone cut through the static, followed by a gravelly voice. "This is Rourke. Who the hell's on my line?" Jacob felt something almost like relief. "It's Carter." A pause. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought you dropped off the map. What's got you breaking radio silence?" "Trouble," Jacob said simply. "The kind that wears armor and thinks it owns people." Rourke grunted. "Location." Jacob sent coordinates. There was a long beat of static before Rourke replied. "I'll put the word out. Don't die before we get there." The line went dead. Jacob powered off the comm and set it aside. Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Friends. Old soldiers," Jacob said. "People who've seen worse than this and lived to tell about it." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "And you trust them?" "With my life," he said. "And yours." The next 2 days were a blur of preparation. Jacob checked his defensive lines, reinforced the weak spots in the cabin walls, and dug fresh snow pits for concealment. Sarah worked alongside him, learning quickly, her alien frame surprisingly strong for its slenderness. She wasn't just a survivor anymore, she was training to stand with him. On the evening of the second day, the low whine of engines drifted over the ridge. Jacob stepped outside into the biting air, hand on his rifle, until he saw the familiar shapes crest the hill. Snowbikes and tracked haulers, painted in mismatched camo, bristling with mounted weapons. The first bike skidded to a stop in the yard. Its rider, a broad man with a beard streaked in white, swung off and grinned. "Carter, you stubborn bastard." Jacob clasped forearms with Rourke. "Didn't think you'd actually come." Rourke shrugged. "You call, we answer. Always." Behind him, more riders dismounted. Jacob recognized faces from long-ago firefights. Illura, sharp-eyed and quick with a blade. Bren, the heavy weapons man who could take apart a drone with his bare hands. And a handful of others who didn't need names spoken. Their presence was enough. Introductions were short. Rourke wasted no time. "What are we looking at?" Jacob gestured toward the tree line. "Noble named Varesh. Once Sarah. Won't take no for an answer. Last time, he sent 12 men. Next time, I expect 20 or more, maybe with a walker unit for intimidation." Bren spat into the snow. "Walker is just a target with legs." Ilara's gaze shifted to Sarah, who stood a step behind Jacob. "She worth all this?" Jacob didn't hesitate. "She's under my roof. That's all the worth you need." Something flickered in Ilara's expression. Approval, maybe. And she nodded. They spent the rest of the day laying out the defense. The cabin was the center, but they dug trenches in a semicircle and set up concealed firing nests among the trees. Bren unpacked a portable railgun, its matte barrel gleaming in the pale light. Ilara worked with Sarah to string noise traps along the ridge approach. By nightfall, the place looked less like a homestead and more like an outpost on the edge of a war zone. That night, gathered around the fire, the air was heavy with the quiet understanding that violence was coming. Rourke broke the silence. "You could still run, Carter. Take her and disappear into the mountains. Let this Varesh chase ghosts." Jacob shook his head. "If I run, he'll follow. And eventually, he'll find someone who can't fight back. This ends, hey." Sarah's voice was soft, but steady. "And I will fight too." Every head turned toward her. She met their gazes without flinching. "I know I am not human, but I know what it is to be hunted. I will not hide while others bleed for me." Bren chuckled low. "She's got more steel than some recruits I've seen." Rourke smiled faintly. "Then we'll make sure she's ready." Morning came with frost so thick the world looked dipped in glass. The traps were armed, the weapons loaded. Jacob could feel the tension in the air, the same electric edge before every battle he'd ever fought. They waited, and when the snowbirds took flight in a sudden, unified burst, Jacob knew the waiting was over. From beyond the ridge came the low, growing roar of engines, heavier this time, and more numerous. The enemy was coming, and they were bringing everything they had. Jacob's hand tightened on his rifle. Positions. The old guard melted into their posts, weapons trained on the ridge. Sarah crouched beside Ilara, bow in hand, her breath steady despite the cold. Jacob took one last look at the cabin, the little home he'd built to keep the world out, and knew that after today, it would never be the same. But then again, neither would he. The line holds. The sound came first, the steady, grinding churn of treads crushing snow. Then the dark shapes crested the ridge, silhouettes blotting out the pale morning light. Varesh's men had come in force. 24 armored soldiers fanned out, rifles at the ready, the insignia of the noble house dark against their chest plates. Behind them lumbered a bipedal walker, its heavy autocannon swiveling in slow, deliberate arcs. Jacob's voice was low over the calm, "Hold your fire until my mark." In their concealed positions, the old guard waited. Alara lay prone behind a drift, her rifle steady. Bren crouched beside the railgun, muttering under his breath. Rourke was in the tree line to the right, where the snow was deepest, the place the walker would slog slowest. Sarah knelt beside Alara, bow drawn, an arrow tipped with a shaped charge. The string didn't tremble. The lead soldier stepped forward. His voice carried over the snow, filtered through an external speaker. "By order of Lord Varesh, you will surrender the alien female to our custody. Any resistance will be met with lethal force." Jacob rose from behind a half-buried barricade, rifle in hand. His voice was clear, cutting through the cold air. "She's under my protection. If you want her, you'll have to walk through me. And my friends." A ripple of unease passed through the enemy ranks. Some recognized the name Carter. Others didn't, but they saw the way he stood, the lack of fear. The lead soldier lifted a gauntleted hand. "Very well." The walker's cannon hummed to life. Jacob spoke into the calm now. The snow erupted. The first volley came from Alara. 2 shots, 2 enemy soldiers dropping before they could find cover. Bren's railgun cracked, the sound like a giant's whip. The walker's left leg sparked and buckled, forcing it to stagger. Noise traps along the ridge shrieked and popped, sowing confusion. Rourke's squad opened up from the flank, their gunfire precise and methodical. Sarah loosed her arrow. It arced high, whistling through the frozen air before slamming into the walker's right knee joint. The charge detonated, sending a plume of smoke and shrapnel into the air. The machine toppled sideways, half buried in the snow. The enemy tried to regroup, but the terrain favored the defenders. They had to push uphill, through deep snow, into overlapping lines of fire. Jacob moved like a man in his element. Short bursts, controlled shots, never wasting a round. Every time an enemy popped up from cover, they went down. One soldier broke through the line, charging toward Sarah with a shock baton. She pivoted, yanked a knife from her belt, and met his swing with a sidestep. Her blade flashed, cutting deep into the soft seam of his armor. He fell into the snow, red blooming beneath him. Alara glanced at her, a flicker of surprise and approval crossing her face before she went back to firing. It lasted 10 minutes, maybe less, but in battle, time stretches and twists. When the shooting stopped, the snow was littered with bodies and smoking metal. The surviving soldiers were retreating, dragging their wounded, leaving the broken walker behind. Then, through the thinning smoke, Varesh appeared. He wasn't armored like his men. Instead, he wore a fay-lined coat, the kind of luxury only a noble could afford. His expression was one of fury barely masked by control. "You've made a mistake, Carter," he said, his voice tight. "She is mine by right." Jacob stepped forward, rifle still in hand, but aimed low. "She's no one's property. You think you can defy me and live?" Varesh sneered. "I have wealth, soldiers, influence." "You had soldiers," Jacob cut in, nodding toward the snow. "And wealth won't buy back the respect you just lost." Varesh's eyes narrowed. "You can't kill me. That would start a blood feud." Jacob didn't move closer. "I'm not going to kill you. But the next time you send men here, I won't just defend. I'll come for you, and I won't stop." The old guard shifted subtly behind him, their silent presence a wall of unspoken promise. Varesh hesitated, pride warred with self-preservation in his eyes. Finally, he turned away, signaling to the few men left. "We're leaving." They vanished back over the ridge, swallowed by the cold horizon. The aftermath was quiet, save for the hiss of cooling metal and the distant cry of carrion birds. Bren was already stripping parts from the walker. could get a good power core out of this. Ilara helped Sarah gather arrows, their hands brushing once in silent camaraderie. Rourke approached Jacob, his face serious. You know he might come back, Rourke said. Jacob nodded. Then I'll be ready. But something tells me he won't. Not after today. Rourke smirked, still stubborn as hell. Jacob looked toward Sarah. She was wiping blood from her blade, movements calm, deliberate. When she noticed him watching, she straightened and walked over. You kept your word, she said. So did you, he replied. You fought. Her gaze softened. I told you. I will not hide while others bleed for me. There was a weight in her words that Jacob understood too well. In that moment, she wasn't just a guest in his home. She was part of it. That night, the old guard feasted in the cabin, laughter and low voices mingling with the crackle of the fire. Outside, the cold still pressed against the walls, but inside, the warmth was more than just from the hearth. When the others had gone to sleep, Jacob sat at the table, cleaning his rifle. Sarah approached, carrying 2 mugs of steaming tea. You could have given me up, she said quietly. It would have been easier. Jacob took a mug, met her eyes. Maybe, but easier isn't always right. She smiled. A small, genuine thing. Then I will make sure my presence is worth the trouble. Jacob chuckled. You already have. Outside, the wind picked up, whispering against the cabin walls. Somewhere beyond the trees, danger still existed. But for now, the line had held. And as long as Jacob drew breath, it always would.